Hello everyone and welcome. In this tutorial I'm going to teach you how to create a little procedural setup to create all kinds of cups and glasses and pottery shapes and you can use very quickly to create different variations of an object. Alright, so I'm going to start by deleting this cube, Shift A, curve Bezier. The reason why is because I want to be able to draw the shape of the object myself, right? So let's delete everything in edit mode, vertices, and let's go to the draw tool there, and we can now just draw the shape of, for example, a cup we would like to have. Beautiful cup. Now I'm just going to make this rotate flat, so we have nice little flat bottom part of our object. The rest can be whatever, pretty much, right? Something like this looks quite cool. Now, let's open up a new window and set this to be geometry nodes. I'm gonna press N to close that down, hit new, and there we go. So how do we make sure that this now turns into a nice a nice round object? You could do that with the screw modifier, but I like to do it in Geonode so we can adjust some more settings, right? So let's do that, and this way we can also resample, choose different resolutions, stuff like that, and do all types of magic we would like to do at some point. So let's hit Shift A, and the first thing we need is to turn this into a mesh. Alright, so let's find a curve to mesh node, and the reason why is because I want to extrude this mesh. Let's go to top view, in segments that go around. That's not a perfect circle, that go around the origin. Wow, I could have done better, but here we are. So that is what I want to create, right? So we need to extrude this over and over again until we have a full circle. So how do we do that? We can't just extrude it in one direction, because then we wouldn't end up with good segments. So what we want to do is we want, of course, to create something like a triangle shape like that to cover the entire circle. All right. So how do we do that? So first things first, I want to extrude this mesh, right? So we can just find Shift A and extrude mesh. There we go. And by default, for example, if we would add a random vector into the X or Y direction, set this to edges, we would only extrude into one direction while we want this to be like that. Okay, so we can't simply choose a vector offset because that's gonna be doing it in one direction. What we can do, however, is set the offset to 0. So now with our extrude mesh, we don't really see anything because nothing is happening with our extrusion. Okay, it's an offset of 0, so it's extruding nowhere. So what we're going to do is we're gonna extrude this, use this extruded mesh to rotate around the origin point. Okay, and we now basically have two meshes, two lines, two of those curvatures, two of these curves inside of each other. But the top, which is the extruded mesh, the extruded edge, is right inside of this mesh. Okay, because we're not extruding by any value, we now just have two of these curves inside of each other pretty much. And we can access the extruded mesh with this top part right there. And that is something we're going to rotate around the origin. So hit Shift A, set position, and we can now just connect the top to the selection, drag out our position node, and we want to have a vector rotate. Vector rotate, and this way we can rotate this around a specific axis. Now the vector is going to be the position because we want to rotate the position of all the points of that curve around one axis. So there we go. And add a little bit of an angle, and right away we are rotating. Now the issue I have here is that I want to be able to draw cups wherever I want, which means that if I move this away from the origin, we're gonna have a little bit of an issue because it's trying to rotate around the origin point. Now luckily for us, there's something we can do about this, right? Because we have a center input, we can drag all of this to the left, and we can drag this out to a sample index. And with a sample index node, we can basically sample a vector, a position of a specific point of our mesh, right? So we can store the vector, the position of, for example, the first point of that curve, which is right there on that edge. And that's going to be a rotation axis. So that is beautiful. So set this to be a vector because the position is a vector. Position. And then we want the index to be, well, 0. right? So connect this up to the center, and right away you can see that this works. So why is this index 0? Well, if we draw a curve, the start point of the curve, if we transfer that to a mesh, is going to be the first point of a mesh, right? Easy as that. So that is working quite easily. And now we can just repeat this pattern until we have a full circle. So how do we do that? Well, we need this process, extruding and rotating, to repeat that a certain amount of times. So let's do that. Shift A, find a repeat zone. And a repeat zone does exactly what we want to have happen, right? So move this to the left, this to the right, and connect your lines so they connect beautifully like this. Amazing. Move them back. There we go. Beautiful. So now we can control the amount of repetitions this has, but it's gonna turn out a little bit weird. Why is this? Well, it's going to try and extrude the entire mesh that we create, right? So once we have this, it's gonna extrude this edge, it's gonna extrude this edge again, and so forth. So we have a lot of overlapping geometry if we keep repeating this pattern. So at the end of our repetition, I want to have a merge by distance. And that way my edges are merged every time we iterate, right? So we can now just set this to larger values. There we go. And you can see if I remove, for example, this merge by distance, have a look at how many vertices we have. And by the way, you can open that panel by dragging this down. Dragging this down and setting this to the spreadsheet, which adds a lot of information about our points and stuff. And we can hide this and see we now have 1.6k points and 5.5k edges. And if we don't have that, if we have the merge by distance, we have a lot less, right? So that's beautiful. So now we need to set this up so it's always closed. How do we do that? Well, we need a little bit of math. Beautiful, I love math. So what we do is we have a circle. That circle has an origin, and we have pizza slices that divide that circle, right? How many pizza slices we need to fill up that circle and how much degrees they need to be rotated depends on, of course, the entire circumference of the circle, which is, 2 pi, I think, and the amount of slices, let's say 6, right? So how do we calculate the angle from that? Well, let me remove this. All of this. There we go. Let's hit Shift A and find, let's start with an integer, right? So I want to have the amount of repetitions, let's say 8. So 8 repetitions, we can crank that right in here. 8 iterations, so 8 pizza slices. And then we have a full rotation, which will be 2 pi or 360 degrees. So we want to divide a full circle by the amount of slices we have, and then we get the angle that we need, right? So drag this out to a math node, and we want this in the bottom, and set this to be 2 pi, I suppose, 2 times pi, and yes, you can literally type in pi and it will work. And then we can connect this to the angle, but let's see what happens. We first need to convert this, we need to set this to be divide, by the way. There we go. Looking quite beautiful, right? This should already work. So let's see what happens when we crank up this number or crank down this number. So that works, right? We can crank this up and everything works fine. And this is basically going to be the resolution of our cup. Beautiful. So this, I'm going to hold Shift and right mouse. This integer can be the resolution, the circle resolution. Right, so let's find Shift A, a group input, and right away I'm going to set this up to be a nice, let's say, procedural setup, right? So I want another input that's going to be this integer, and I want that integer right in our modifier panels to be like 10 for now. Beautiful. And let's make sure that the default value is also set to be 10, right there. Beautiful. Now we can do the same thing for the resolution in the curve, in the height, right? This. And the way we do that is basically with a resample curve. There we go. And we have a count of 10, for example, right? So this can just be in the input as well. And make sure that we rename the first one to, let's say, profile resolution, and this to height resolution. right? So now if we change the profile resolution or change the height resolution, we get a nice remeshing basically of our object, right? Quite beautiful. And let's set this to be 24 for now. Amazing. Okay, so that is the initial setup. Works like a charm. Let's delete that. And in the end, all I want is add a little bit of thickness, right? Shift A, find, let's say, extrude mesh once again, and set to faces and recheck or uncheck individual. And now we can add a little bit of thickness, right? Beautiful. Find, Shift A. Right now when we extrude, the original mesh is deleted. We only remain the extruded mesh. So Shift A, join geometry, and join this up with the extrude mesh, right? Beautiful. And then after this, we get a hard edge. So we need to merge this together. Right now, there's two edges here. They're not connected. So connect them with a merge by distance. There we go. And we get that smoothness back. All right, beautiful. Now, the only reason why it's not completely smooth yet is because the normals, when you extrude, are flipped. All right, you can see that by clicking this and face orientation, right? Red, it's blue. We want this all to be the same color, preferably blue. And we can do that by hitting Shift A and find, what is it called? Flip faces. There we go. Flip faces. Beautiful. And everything is blue and everything is smooth. Amazing. So that is the thickness of the object. So I'm going to drag that offset out, the offset scale. I'm going to drag this out to a math node, right? 0.03 and 1 and multiply, right? The reason why is because I want to control the thickness with a nice slider as well. And I'm going to just crank this out to a group input once again and rename this thickness. Beautiful. Now I can imagine you want to set this to different materials as well, custom materials that you have, glass materials, whatever you want. So hit Shift A and find set material, beautiful, and drag this to another group input. And there we go, we can now set the material to what we like it to be. Now there's just one more thing that I want to change. And that is, let's say, oh no, I think we don't have to change that anymore actually. Should be good. So now we have a beautiful setup. We can just duplicate this, change the shape into whatever we want, like so, and it will beautifully draw that shape. All right, and this way we can draw any type of pottery. The only thing is, if I now want to draw like a wine glass in the following way, for example, like this, it's going to be weird. So how do we fix that? Well, I think we can just set a custom index for each object, right? So for example, for my wine glass, I want my my origin, my center point to be picked, for example, right there, which is a different index than at the start, right? So we can just set a custom index, right? And you can see we can set this to be beautifully in the middle there, for example. Now, and they have the issue of this collapsing. That's not nice. So what we can do is Shift A, find vector math, and we can just add a little value, for example, in X, Y, or Z, right? So let's find a combine X, Y, Z, and let's just, you know, we can move, for example, in X direction, Y. Both work fine. I think we can just do both of them at the same time, actually, for safety reasons. So we can just drag these out to another group input. There we go. Oh, sorry, connect that to the same value, X and Y. It's going to be to the center offset. And this is going to be the center of rotation, right? And let's remove this in front of our material. There we go. So now we can actually set a little bit of center offset. That moves it to the side and we get a beautiful wine glass, right? So this way you can use this technique for pretty much any shape you'd like. Alright, so that is pretty much it. We can now turn this into any material, right? Select a nice glass. I'm just gonna drag some Blender Kit materials on there to show you how this works. Let's go to rendered view. There we go. I'm going to add a quick environment texture, which is an HDRI. Get them for free on polyhaven.com. And I'm going to grab an indoor material like that. Set my film to transparent. Film transparent. There we go. And just search, for example, for a nice glass material. Glass. Oh, go to the material tab. This is Blender Kit, by the way. Free as well. Amazing. Glass. Wrong one. Glass. Let's find a nice glass material. Something that looks cool. I'm not sure why it's so hard to find the glass material. Let's go with this. And then we can just set that in the modifiers as glass. And now this one is glass. And let's find ceramic. Ceramic is cool as well, right? We can just drag or just click that and then we can make this ceramic. Glazed ceramic. Isn't that beautiful? A beautiful coffee cup. Add some thickness. And you can even switch that around. Have a beautiful coffee cup. Now another material would be, let's just find another ceramic. This is quite cool actually for the pot. And we could just make this a nice pot. Green ceramic tiles. So this isn't working because we don't have a UV yet, right? So we can actually add a UV map quite easily by Shift A, store named attributes. I want to store a vector. Actually, we don't want it here. We want this to be, oh no, it's fine. Store named attribute. Vector, and I want to store off my curve. I want to store the spline parameter, Shift A spline parameter, the vector, right? Because the vector of this curve, for example, is going to go from 0 to 1, which is going to give us one dimension of our UV map. The other one will be in the other direction. So let's store this first, combine XYZ, and let's connect this there and store this as UV map. Right, then in our shader, let's see what happens if we set that to be our UV map. Delete this, Shift A, attribute, and save this, or sorry, set UV map here, vector, vector. And you can see that now we have one axis pretty much of our UV. Now, in order to store the other dimension, which is the circle dimension, pretty much, I guess. We have to store another value, right? Now, we don't need to do this in Geonodes per se. We can do this here as well. So we can actually drag, split this up first, UV map, because remember, we only store the X value. We can find Shift A separate XYZ into a combine XYZ and only have the X there. And the Y we can now choose to be whatever we want. So drag this out to a gradient texture and press Ctrl T. And that way we add a texture and a mapping node. If nothing happens for you, go to Edit, Preferences, and enable the node wrangler. Should be in Blender by default. And now we can see that we still have a little bit of an issue here at the side. But what I'm going to do is set this to be object, which may look weird at the start, but we can set this to be radial. And then it's going to go around the object. Now there's just one more issue we have, okay? And that is if we go to Edit mode and we move everything to the left, then the texture is moving as well. We don't want that, and the reason why that happens is because we move our UV map according to the origin pretty much, and I want that origin to always stay at the center point, right? Now we can do that because we already stored that sample point at the sample index, right? So Shift A, store named attribute to a vector, and connect your sample index to store that there and name this pause, for example, right? And then instead of using just the object, drag it to the left, vector math, subtract, drag this out to an attribute and name this pause. And that way we're going to subtract the origin of our object with the center position, and that will mean that it always stays in the same place. Now, it may not be perfect. We may still have a little bit of stretching going on, for example, here, and compression there. But I think it is totally fine, not gonna lie. So then we can still do the scaling and stuff right here. You can see we can stretch this up, we can remove this, or sorry, compress this a little bit so everything looks a little bit better. So I think that should look quite nice, right? At least if you ask me, it works. And that's all we can ask for. Right, so then of course you will need to use this for your other materials as well. So what I'm gonna do is just group this part, everything that goes into the mapping with Ctrl G, and just exit the group. There we go. And then we set this to be UV map calculation, I guess. There we go. So this is the node you will transfer to your other objects as well as your input to the mapping that controls your texture. All right, quite easy and cool, right? So now if we duplicate this, Shift D, move it to the side, turn this into like a pot. There we go. Make a nice little pot like that. Set this material to be, for example, plastic. Then we would need to go into that plastic material. So set this to be plastic, for example. There we go. And then find Shift A, find that calculation node, calculation, and set this to be the input to your vector. There we go. All right, then we can of course do some rotations if we would like that. Rotation on the Z, is it? Z to 90. We can increase the scaling to create a nice looking pattern. All right, and you could use the same method to create, for example, a beautiful lamp, right? Let's duplicate this. There we go. Let's create a little bit of a plan. Draw the shape of a lamp, for example, something like this. Let me go up. Beautiful. Into like a little knob there, for example. Just like that, right? You can create some nice intricate shapes, I suppose. I'm gonna go to my modifiers and set the center of rotation to a higher place, like that. And add a little bit of offset to it as well, like so. And I'm going to set the material to something else. So let's find a bit of a metal pattern. Pattern. There we go. Find something cool and antique like this. It probably won't look cool, but you know, pattern metal. Let's set that to be the material. What am I doing? Set that to be the material. Pattern metal. And of course, add the node group in the shader as well. Calculation, and add that in there. Beautiful. Now just change the scaling a little bit, make it look cool, I suppose. There we go. We could rotate this around that axis as well. Maybe even move it so that we have a nice place that we like so. Looks quite cool. And then we can duplicate this and then delete everything. And then we could even add a little bit of a lamp post. I don't know what it's called. Like this, like that. Move it up like that. A little knob there, I suppose. And then move, of course, your center of rotation to something like this, maybe. And then move it a bit more to the center. Then find a nice stained glass material, perhaps, that we can use. This one looks cool. Set it to be here as well, the stained glass, and remember to add the calculation right there and connect that there, and maybe scale that a little bit nicer, like so. Isn't that cool? We got a little light in no time. Amazing. So yeah, I think very useful actually, more useful than I thought at first, but you can create a lot of objects quite quickly with this. And let's just add a little light there in the center, a little spotlight perhaps, with a nice radius. There we go, to yellow or orange, with a nice size, and set it to like 1000. And perhaps move it to the inside, like that. Not sure if it actually lights the light material a little bit, right? If we make this strong, we'll see. Oh, it lights up quite beautifully, actually. Nice. So I am surprising myself in this one a little bit, but that's okay. So if you like this tutorial, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe. I would enjoy any one of those. And if you make something cool with this, please let me know that too. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers!